talk, shall we, about Boris Johnson. All eyes on the Prime Minister today as he tries to shore up his position after Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid's resignations. Those happened within 10 minutes of each other. He'll face MPs at PMQs later. You can hear that on Times Radio. Then at 3 o'clock, there is a liaison committee as well. So it's quite a hefty day for Boris Johnson. Alice Thomson, what is the betting, do you think? Do you think that Boris Johnson is a man who will ever resign?
No. I mean, having worked with him and having been shared an office with him, I would say he will cling on to that wallpaper to the very end. He is deluded about the fact that he can stay forever. And as he said, I mean, he wants 3 terms. And that, he is a historian and he's a classicist and he sees himself very much as being at the heart of government. He's not going to get rid of it.
How can you be deluded when your health secretary and your chancellor have both resigned within 10 minutes of each other? How can you continue in that delusion?
Well, what's extraordinary is he's just replaced them immediately and sails on and actually tells all his backbenchers that it's a good thing because he's now got a new chancellor who's more in line with him.
Will Self, quickly, what do you think?
Well, I just feel that I've spent most of my adult life watching the psychodramas of public school boys who I don't particularly like. And I can't be alone in the country in being absolutely weary of this and this implosion, and particularly because of why Johnson is imploding, his perfidy and his unwillingness to confront stuff that Alice has written about a lot recently, which is the sort of, kind of moral laxity, to put it very mildly, within his own party, makes it a really kind of disgusting imbroglio to witness, I think.
Well, this question of loyalty, I suppose. We've had Nadeem Zahawi on today, and Michael Portillo came on this programme and he said Nadeem Zahawi actually had Boris Johnson's fate in his hands. When he approached him last night and said, will you be Chancellor of the Exchequer? If Zahawi had said no, it would be all over for Boris Johnson. If he can't get a Chancellor of the Exchequer, he couldn't have continued. And he said people will judge Nadeem Zahawi for that. Do you think that people will be judged for sticking with Boris Johnson more than they will be for resigning from his cabinet?
Well, I think it's a very difficult call, isn't it? And I think that the sort of revolving door of resignations and the obvious gamesmanship involved in timing your resignation, again, as I've already said, and I suppose it's not what political commentators should say. I find it such an unedifying spectacle. And, Matthew Paris's look at the runners and riders just now, the idea that somebody like Ben Wallace, just for making a few hawkish remarks, is somehow in the running to assume the monumental powers that a British Prime Minister have is really kind of, laughable. So, no, I don't think this kind of question of loyalty and not loyalty is going to be the deciding factor. I think that the problem from the public's point of view is the calibre of the candidates. Zahawi's only, his hat's in the ring because of rolling out the vaccine programme. I mean, he's risen on a sort of spume of vaccination. So I no, it's not down to loyalty anymore. It's just down to some sort of caprice of fate.
And that's the game. It talks about the gamesmanship. Will there? The game aspect of politics. Maybe politics has to be a game. They take it very, very seriously. They take themselves very, very seriously, and I'm sure many are in it for legitimate reasons. But the jockeying for power and the clinging to power makes it more unedifying, doesn't it? Because ultimately,
I think it's incredibly unedifying. I think actually listening to Nadeem Zahawi this morning was really, really hard for anyone because he is a decent man. He was actually quite good with the vaccines, but you cannot believe that he is so desperate to become Chancellor that he is prepared to do this because it is putting himself before the country. He couldn't answer that question. That is what he is doing. He is actually just so obsessed by his own career that he's prepared to do this. It's nothing to do with the fact that, he thinks that Boris Johnson said sorry or anything like that. He just wants to be Chancellor of the Exchequer. And that just feels really, as you say, unedifying. And it just feels really sickening that the MPs have lost their way so much. And you have all these sex scandals. And now you have this sort of, trying to get, just the position they can have so they can say they've done something rather than achieved anything.
But why would you want to be Chancellor of the Exchequer possibly for 2 weeks?
Well, it could be less than that.
What is the point of that? What is the point of that?
So he took a gamble, and I think he's taken the wrong gamble probably now. And he must be thinking that this morning. But, they all had to. Michael Gove goes to the opera. That's the way out, isn't it? Is to go off and do something completely different for the evening. And I think he's quite interesting. I think he may be a kingmaker, and he was 6 years ago. He realised 6 years ago that Boris Johnson wasn't up to it and said that, didn't he?
But will he do it again? And why has he not done it now? And that's the thing. The timing of it always becomes interesting. Is ambition a bad thing, though, Will Self? That, maybe if you're going to get to the very top of the very grimy world that is politics, maybe you have to be almost pathologically a narcissist and completely so filled with self-belief that you don't regard anything other than the pursuit of your ambition as acceptable.
Well, I don't know. My grandfather was a permanent undersecretary and ran a ministry, and he used to say that what reduced him to tears in his career was the inability of politicians to understand the non-partisan nature of the civil service. And I'm afraid the standard that's been lost in public life exists between, incumbent governments and the British civil service. And this generation of politicians have grown up in an environment where there is no conception anymore of disinterested public service. And we can see the consequences all around it. And it's been a folie à deux, the whole sort of scandals of Partygate, and now these issues surrounding sex pest members of parliament. The failure of the civil service, the effective collusion of the civil service in this kind of deterioration in public standards is what's resulted in this, yes, intense and bizarre show of narcissism.
But can the civil service do anything about that? I mean, because they would say, we've not changed, the world has changed, the politicians have changed, and actually possibly even the way we consume politics has changed. We live in a world that absolutely encourages and fosters that narcissism, that 24 hours a day jolt of image making. And maybe the civil service might say, well, we've kept the same, it's everything else that's got worse.
Well, that may well be the case, but look at how, it used to be said that politics is show business for ugly people. Look how bad our show business for ugly people is, and look how unentertaining it is. I'm riveted with boredom when these people stand up to speak. Their rhetorical flair, their intellectual grasp, their depth, their cultural hinterland, none of it is in evidence. Alice says that Johnson was a classicist and a historian. I'm sorry, I've read his books. They're tissue thin. These are not heavyweight people. I'm fed up with it.
I think there is that sense, isn't there, that there's 60 million people in this country, and these are the people we've ended up representing us. And that is rather extraordinary, because, I can't think of any other careers or professions or jobs where you end up with so many people who have either had some sort of, committed some sort of sexual assault, or behaved that badly, or been that self-obsessed, or been a narcissist. It's just impossible to imagine anywhere else.
Because quite often we say, who's next? And the answer we often get is, well, it's very slim pickings. It really is. Should we talk a little bit about Labour? PMQs today. I don't know how gripped. Some people love PMQs. Other people think it's always a bit of a letdown because, Keir Starmer starts talking about something that happened, earlier on in the week when he should perhaps be more reactive. What would you like to see, Alice, from Keir Starmer at PMQs today?
I think Keir Starmer's really got to go for it now. He knows he's weak. He knows he's damaged. What he mustn't do is think, well, I shouldn't try and push him over the edge, that I've got to hold back. I've got to be the statesman, because actually now we need to see some passion, I think. And in the way that Angela Rayner's very good at this sort of thing. She really revels in chaos. She thrives on it. You don't get the same sense with Keir Starmer, but he's got to help push him over the edge if he can't stand back and be uninvolved in any way. And so I think he has got to show his passion, actually.
Will Self, what would you like to hear from Keir Starmer today at PMQs?
Well, I think he's incapable of it. As Nietzsche said, character is destiny. He's had ages now to burst into rhetorical flame. It's clearly not going to happen. So I think anybody who's waiting for the sort of Starmer moment is it's a futile. It's just not going to happen. He's and Alice is right. Now, Angela Rayner at least has this capacity to feel that kind of energy and thrive on it. Whether or not she can grasp the nettle in the right way to sort of rouse the left, I somewhat doubt, which is a very, very tattered crew as well.
Well, that's the other point, isn't it? That however bad it is for Boris Johnson, and it is very, very bad, it doesn't look like the Labour Party has got itself together under this leadership enough to sweep him out of power. They may, the election's a long way away, but Boris Johnson has been perhaps lucky in his opponent. And maybe Keir Starmer's been lucky in his opponent, Will, because if you replace Boris Johnson with someone boringly competent, you would take away Keir Starmer's USP. And then you'd be left with some of the Brexit hangover, some of the Red Wall hangover, and that might be very hard for Keir Starmer to beat.
No, I mean, what's going to really help Labour is the cost of living crisis. I mean, it's just the sad fact of the matter. What's going to kind of toughen up their brand is when there are a lot of people living close to the poverty line in this country, and come the winter, they're going to be pushed over it. And that's just going to introduce a groundswell of discontent that Labour will be able to build on. So I think, a week is a long time in politics, and things are certainly going to shift on that major declivity over the next few months.
More to come with Will Self and Alice Thomson appearance. But we're going to talk about butter now, the cost of living. A kilo of Lurpak butter now costs more than £9 in many supermarkets. That is crazy, isn't it, on the face of it? The brand says it's trying to pay dairy producers fairly, who are facing rising costs in oil and fertiliser. Alice, I suppose in some way it's become this kind of totemic brand, hasn't it? I mean, £9 for a kilo of Lurpak butter seems ridiculous. Does this just draw a line, though, between people who might not notice that, and there are people who will shop and, they don't want to give it up, and people who that's probably their budget for the week?
Yes, and I think it's, we're not even in the autumn when you're going to have to start paying for heating bills. I think it is extraordinary, and it is going to be very tough. As you say, there is going to be people who won't notice this as much, but, those single mums, when half of them have got, living below the poverty line, that's going to be incredibly difficult for them. They also say that supermarkets are now tagging meat and other products because people are now so desperate that they are stealing them more. And you can understand that. And you can understand why people are so worried and going on strike, and why there is actually quite a lot of people who are pro people going on strike, because they understand that with inflation, it's really, you have very little money left, a lot of people.
What have you noticed in terms of just the cost of things, of anything, not necessarily supermarket stuff, but, other stuff too, and energy bills, etc.?
The energy bills, I am nervous about the autumn. We all are, because we're not using our heating at the moment. So it's actually not yet as bad, but it will be. And you can put an extra jumper on, but you're going to need a lot. It's going to be very tough for a lot of people, particularly in older homes and for the elderly. And I would say it is the supermarket shop, actually, that you notice. We've got 4 kids. So you do see it. You see it each week, because you put the same things on each week. Yeah. And then you're starting to think, may not put that one on, or do you really want that? And there's all that kid pressure of, they want extra things, and they have gone up. And I think things like school uniform are going to be an issue. There's all those sort of things that are going to come in September and are going to be more expensive.
Will Self, by September, who knows who the Chancellor will be? Who knows what the Chancellor, whoever he or she is, will be doing to try to ease the cost of living? What should he or she do?
Right, it is very difficult. I mean, the only levers traditionally governments have had at their disposal have been fiscal or monetary policy of one sort or another. And the fact is this is two bad things meeting each other. One is a bit of a zombie economy. There's been, an acceptance of all sorts of debt in the economy that we can't actually repay. So that's a problem. And now we have a real problem with commodity prices globally. So I don't think a chancellor is going to be able to do anything much but round off the corners. Obviously, what I'm going to say, and I'm sure Alice would agree, is that there needs to be a very hard look at the situation of the least well off in the society, and a move to ameliorate their situation that is, in a sense, curiously non-ideological. It's to nobody's benefit to have these kinds of levels of poverty and suffering, frankly, that we're likely to see.
And just quickly on that, Will, do you think it matters that whoever the Chancellor is, they are someone who is perceived as someone who can understand those kind of financial struggles? Because Rishi Sunak fell foul of that. Nadeem Zahawi is not short of a penny. Do you think there's going to be a problem with a relatability gap? Should Nadeem Zahawi still be Chancellor in the autumn?
Yeah, I think there's a whole problem for the Tories of relatability over this. I mean, I think the sort of I think in the Tory party, they were kind of emboldened by taking the red wall. They thought they took the red wall in some sense because of some kind of weird organic conservatism in the country. They took the red wall because they won over social conservatives who were pro-Brexit. That's all, who traditionally voted Labour. And they were an older demographic group as well. So no, I think there is a real credibility gap. And I think that, in line, this reminds me in a different register of the kind of last days of the Major regime, sort of 25 years ago. It's the same, wholesale loss of credibility in government. So no, I don't think they'll be able to pull that one off.
And it's changing their policies anyway, because they've become more interventionist because of that red wall. And so the question of what is a conservative now is a very open one. And that's the one they're going to have to tackle if they try and pick a new leader, you would imagine. Let's move on to your column today, Alice, with the headline, "Men must stop telling us to have babies." Last week's census results were released showing falling birth rates in parts of the UK, with some commentators, male commentators, saying we need to give birth more, which is to say you need to give birth more, not us, because we can't do it. Is it just you're annoyed about this part of the culture war, or is there something else here as well, Alice?
It's just the fact that men do really love talking about the fact they're not having enough babies. And actually, it is a women's issue in the end. I mean, I'd love it if it wasn't. I'd love it if it was 50-50. I'd love it if we could all give birth. But what they're saying...
I'm glad we can't, to be honest.
I think you may say that. But what I'm saying, and Asmin might feel the same, is that it is odd being lectured by them. So we have Paul Morland, who's the demographer, said at the weekend, we aren't having enough babies. It has fallen. It's fallen in Japan dramatically. It's fallen in China. It's fallen in India. There is a major problem, the demography of Western countries and of developed countries. And I think their view, and Paul Morland's was extraordinary, as was other men's, is what women would like. So if you have 3 children, you'd get a telegram from the Queen. And I can tell you, having 4 children, that would have made no difference to me.
But the other thing, of course, I think, and I mean, again, this might be anecdotal, but, a lot of younger women who are in that kind of, childbearing range don't want to have children because they know it's going to mean the end of their careers.
So
it just is.
And that's what's interesting.
Because Alice, you know what? They're going to have to do the childcare.
Precisely. So that's what's interesting to me, is what other countries have done. So actually, you get this divide, and in countries like Hungary and Poland and Greece, actually, and Italy, so southern Europe, and then those sort of countries, what they've done is they've given women more money to stay at home and have babies. And that's what they wanted to do. Whereas actually France and Germany have gone the other way. They've tried to help women back into the workplace, and they've also helped them with childcare. And I think that is the way forward. I feel very guilty because Stig is looking at me as in I'm too nervous now to say anything.
No, God, no, I totally agree.
So I think it's a joint conversation. I think it should be between men and women, but I just don't think we should let men be the only ones talking about it. And they do like the facts and figures. And if you ask the women, they would all say childcare, cost of living. They would say,
you don't just pop them out.
Yeah. No, and also they would say, yes, and they would say it's tricky, having babies really tough. And we've all been scared off it by all these stories and, it all that side. And also having somewhere to live. I mean, you've got to bring them up somewhere, and it's very difficult because there isn't enough housing at the moment.
Will, do you fancy mansplaining this one, or do you agree that the childcare point seems to be the inarguable one? If you make childcare cheaper, it's easier for all families to have children and for childcare to be shared.
Well, I just feel you're handing me a poison baby's bottle sort of formula mixed with cyanide in it. But I mean, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. And I certainly think traditionally men have simply not been involved enough in childcare. And that's one of the main underlying points here. We have lamentable provision for both parents in terms of time off work, and there isn't enough concentration on building, the idea of men as not just child carers, but infant carers as well. And I think that kind of culture would then make it possible for this argument, this discussion not to be, it's unassailable. And I think it's significant Alice wrote this column off the back of the repeal of Roe versus Wade in the States. It's unassailable that in some sense reproductive rights lie with women. But the conversation about what the kind of demography of our society should be and what values we attach to having children and building families is undoubtedly a conversation everybody has to be involved in, and it becomes very divisive when it's any one group just being involved in it. And I think surely that's the point of Alice's column. In this case, it becomes infuriating to have men, exactly as you say, kind of mansplaining pregnancy and having children to women in that way.
Yeah, and thankfully, Will, you and I have avoided treading into those particular landmines today, so well done us. Fascinating stuff from both of you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. That's Will Self and Alice Thomson there.
Just very quickly on the great butter debate, a lot of you saying, hang on a minute, who uses a kilo, £9, blah, 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 etc. So I've just looked on the Tesco app, which is what I use. Lurpak spreadable, 750 grams is £5.30, which works at £7 a kilo. I think it was in certain other high-end supermarkets. You know which one I mean. It went up to £9. In fact, Lurpak slightly salted, spreadable, is £4.49, which is £8.98 per kilo. So it is true.
My wife loves butter more than almost anything else in the world, and it would be the last luxury that we let go, because it would be. She won't like me for saying this, but we once went back to my house in Loughborough, and she brought her own butter with her.
Was it Lurpak?
Because she knew she was going to get flora otherwise.
I use Bertolli.
Oh, yeah.
That's not even real
It's
butter.
not, yeah, exactly. Do it properly or don't do it at all. At 9:32, this is Times Radio Breakfast. Let's get the news and sport with Alex Moore.